Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another session of Focus on Liberia on the marketplace where we talk everything finance and economics. We have a special session today for you on the draft budget. Today we brought in some heavyweight to help us make sense of the budget. Today we have Dr. Joel King, we have Larry Kennedy, we have Isaac Batuka with us today. I think this is probably his first time meeting him. We also have Sam who will be joining us later on. And again, today, this is a special session on the draft budget. We're trying to make sense of it. What can be done better? How did the government collect the revenue? You know, how is it being spent? And, hopefully that we can make sense of the budget and make sure that we, get an alternative of what we think could have been done better from our guest today. Again, as I said, my name is Gabriel. I am your co-host here. I have my co-host with me, Alex Coffee. We have some special guests today, so I will turn this over to Alex to introduce himself, and then we will go one at a time to our guests to actually have them introduce themselves. So, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Gilbert, for that intro. Again, my name is Alex. I co-host the program with Gilbert every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 2 p.m. Central Time, my time, and I believe it's 7 p.m. in Liberia. Um, so we wanted to share the show so that people can have the listening, and we will be bringing comments from our guests, and so that we can make it interactive. So that's where we will be. Please share the show. Please share the show. Thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah. So, thank you, Alex. Again, guys, welcome, Dr. King, Larry, Isaac, Samuel. It's a pleasure having you guys on today. I think you guys are some of the heavyweight when it comes to talking finance and economics. So you guys will help us make sense of these things today. Again, so I want you guys to take maybe 30 seconds or to a minute to introduce yourself. I will start with Dr. Ken. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience and our audience today?
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel. Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. I want to say thanks first to the leadership of the Focus of Liberia for inviting us to this. I also want to thank you, Gabriel, and thanks Alexander as well for taking on this. My friend Larry Kennedy, who I've known for some time now, and also Ava Tukba, who's on this call as well. And I've heard a lot about Sam Jackson. During my days at the university, he was in the forefront of a lot of stuff. So it's great that we all are here just to talk about this, right? And I just gave you a little bit of my background. I have a PhD in organizational leadership and did a diploma program in development economics at Oxford and executive coaching at Cambridge and a number of different things. But put all of that education aside, right? This where we're here to talk about today is kind of more of a bread and butter issue. I'm really attracted to this budget and what's in it because of my whole take around development economics
Yeah.
and economics of the poor. Two folks that have been following Esther Duflo at MIT and
Yes.
Banerjee at I think Harvard talk about that. And you got to put yourself in the shoes and of what it is to live on $1 a day or
Yeah.
on a $2 a day. If you cannot put yourself in that shoe, then it's difficult for you to be able to provide service to your people. So that's why I'm here to talk about whether the revenue projections and the revenue streams to justify the budget realistic,
Right.
and on the expenditure side, whether the revenue can accommodate that. So it's great being with you guys on this call, and I look forward to an open discussion. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a great introduction. Glad to have you here. I like Esther Duflo as well at MIT, so I'm glad you also like her as well.
Yeah.
Professor Larry Kennedy, would you? I know you're a regular here sometimes. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks, Gabriel. Thanks, Alexander, for hosting us. And thanks to the FOL family, Anthony and Dennis. You guys have been doing a great job with this nonprofit organization. And to my good friend, Joel Dr. King, also Iva and Sam Jackson, it's always a pleasure having these discussions because it's with these discussions that we get to learn. Liberia is not an easy place to develop. Any low-income country, developing country, the economy is different than the developed world. The work that needs to be done in Liberia will require a lot of different people, a lot of different mindset, people from a lot of different backgrounds. I come from a financial economics background, also an adjunct instructor. I also have a strong background in technology. I did computer science as well. So not only did I help develop a lot of the systems in the banks that I work for, but I also was able to use a lot of the analytical work, a lot of the finance training that I have. So hopefully we can have this discussion, get a better understanding. I would try as much as possible not to be technical, just try to keep it as basic as possible so we can all interact and learn from one another. Yeah. Anyone who claimed to know it all, that person is dangerous.
Correct.
So hopefully we can learn from one another and have these discussions without any insults or anything like we see so many times. Like I told Anthony one time, I said, politics in Liberia is like Mortal Kombat. Everyone's trying to kill the other person to try to and then step on a dead body in order to kind of make themselves feel better about themselves. It doesn't have to be that way. So let's have these discussions and learn from one another.
No, thank you. That was a great introduction. Thank you for I'm glad you said that. We don't want to be technical here. If you're being technical or anybody's being technical, we'll hold you to that. We'll remind you that this, the most of the people that we talk to, the audience, we're trying to take the technicality on, when we're talking finance and economics. So we'll hold you to that, or hold anyone else to that. I'm sure we have Sam on here and Isaac Vartukwa as well. I don't know if they can hear me. Can any of you guys hear me?
Yeah, I think Isaac and Sam are having technical internet issues. But Isaac is on the road. He's in Liberia in Riverside, so he's traveling. So the internet will go up and down. Sam Jackson is in South Africa. I don't know why he's having that problem with internet.
Yes, gentlemen, how you guys doing? I'm so sorry, guys. It's a bad storm out here in Johannesburg. I can hear you guys. I'm so sorry, guys. It's a very bad storm out here. I just want to apologize to the listening audience. But I'm just going to basically, if you don't mind, just basically give you my views quickly.
Just introduce
I've
yourself.
I've never liked any Liberian budget.
Introduce yourself for 30 seconds and then follow that with your view and go first.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, clearly.
Yeah, okay. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that I've never really liked. Okay, great. Okay, look, let's just be clear. This is not a budget that I would have put together. Let's just be clear about that, okay? I want a budget that is lean, mean, efficient, and does a lot of work in terms of public sector investment. I want to see more.
So it's sometimes it's a battle, especially when Tava gets in Liberia. It's usually the internet connectivity isn't really strong on our side. So
he's in South Africa with the heavy storm. So, but basically, we Larry and Joel, we started some preliminary discussion on the budget before the Thanksgiving holiday. And what the budget, our own impression about the budget is that, it's good. Every time Sam Jackson come in, we're giving the space to make his point.
Right.
Yeah, Sam, we pause for you. He's on.
Sam, if you can hear us, please continue.
So when we look at the budget, it's a good thing. The first thing is a good thing
Look,
to.
yeah, I can hear you guys. Look, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, so what I'm trying to basically say is that, yeah. So let me just go quickly and just tell you that, okay, I'm not pleased by any Liberian budget, okay, because it's not heavily weighted to efficient, lean, and effective management of the government. Okay, it's strictly, mostly, to me, it's pretty parasitic, meaning that a large chunk of the budget goes for recurring expenditure. And in the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf administration was almost 70% of the public wage bill, okay, was part of expenditure. Okay, this budget is 45%, but
Okay, so I think we can either have Dr. Dr. King, or
No, so the, I mean, the budget. While it is true that it's a good thing to expand our budget, because in different quarters, different speakers have talked about taking the budget to $1 billion and things like that. So it's a good thing to step the budget up. But the current budget, from our just a cursory review of the budget initially, it leaves more question. And we've heard different, school of thoughts, different people talk about the budget. It needs some, further explanation as to its transparency and things like that. And one of the questions that come about that people wonder is this budget for election? Is it intended to score some points? Knowing that we are 2 years to election. And that can also be, given if you look deep down into the budget, with you have an increment of more than 200 million, but that 200 million is now being transferred into recurrent expenditure, especially on the side of the legislature. There's increases in the legislative budget. There's increases in the Ministry of State budget. One would have thought that some of that increase will now go into a more of development project. Yes, they have the public sector investment program, but that too leaves much to be desired, because most of that is either you can see that there's $10 million for county tour. You can see that there's money for executive mansion repair, which is a consistent thing. So if you look on the revenue side, it leaves much to be desired. Government says that they're not changing the policies on tax from last year to this year, but one will wonder where that money is coming from. And we also want to look at the economic outlook and things like that. So again, while Sam is state juggling and stuff, we will ask our guests here to give your own impression, your general impression, maybe in 2 minutes each, to give your general impression on how you feel about the budget so far. Dr. King.
Yeah. Let me again, guys. Thank you so much. So my general impression of this budget, and I went through it, and I think a lot of it you guys have already talked about. If you look at it, especially when it comes to budget in Liberia, you have I'll call the Reg X and the Cap X, right? And you guys know the recurring expenses and capital expenses. But my initial impression on this budget, based on the fact that the objective of this whole government is to be able to cater to the poor. And so my whole intent was that looking at this, and even if we can discuss the revenue side of it and what's going, and I'll tell you what it is, even on the revenue side, we rarely go down to the number. And what you're saying, before I come back to my earlier point here, is that there's a heavy reliance on our key commodity items, right? There's a heavy reliance on iron ore, heavy reliance on rubber, and all of those. And it made a projection based on those. But what they're not really understanding in that projection, right? Mm-hmm. That it is projected that even though you saw a mild increase in iron ore price in 2021. There's tremendous decrease in the price of iron ore in 2022 because you know why? For example, China, who is the largest consumer of iron ore, are reducing that. And the reason why they're reducing that is because of the pollution effect.
Yeah.
So you cannot bank on iron ore as a net revenue generator based on this budget because that's not true. You can argue for rubber, right? So we'll see that the price of rubber has increased a little bit in 2021. We don't want to get too technical here, but it has increased a little bit in 2021 and it's projected to increase a little more in 2022. But then if you look at that variance in terms of that, to accommodate for what they're saying in this budget, it really is not reliant. It doesn't really make sense.
Right.
And kind of looking at that, and what most of you guys have known, you guys been beating this up and then talking about it. I mean, if you look at the history of all the budgets and stuff created, I mean, there's no way you have that percentage jump. What accounts for that percentage jump in this budget? It's not really clear to me. And so my take on this is, and I don't want to put blame on what I don't want to say is election fraud. It's an election ploy to be able to get this budget there to say, oh, we're doing this, but the budget has to be realistic, right?
Yeah.
But let me also say that I do give credit to the Liberia Revenue Authority, particularly the way they do business, okay? And one way to do it is through the balance, what they call the balance scorecard. Balance scorecard is a very effective, it's an old tool, but it's a very effective performance management tool that look at your processes, look at your system, look at the people involved, look at scales, and look at all of those to achieve that intended result. So that's just from a flip side of this. It kind of called to me that this budget's supposed to be, from a pro perspective, it's supposed to take Liberians from mat to mattresses, right? Or remember on the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf government, it was Papa non-com, right? And this the whole objective of this whole real government is pro-poor, cater to the poor. But if you look at this in totality, you look at the revenue side, you look at expenditure side, and we can get to a lot of a number of this.
Yeah.
But you see that it's not addressing the core objective of why this government came to bear.
Yeah. Great.
So
Thank you.
Thank you. So what we maybe we can have Larry give his own impression about the budget as well.
Yes.
So here's the thing. The budget is not credible. Even if you did some simple forecasting, even if you try to predict, you can see the budget is not credible. Guess why? Imagine we start a business. Every month, the business made $500 LD. Every month, we made $500 LD. We get down to about November. All of a sudden, one of the partners in the business said, you know what? Let's go buy some new equipment because I suspect this particular month of November, the business is not going to make $500 like it did all the previous 10 months. Now we're going to make $800. You're going to turn around and say, but my man, we made $500 for 10 months.
Yeah.
How are we going to make $800?
Yeah.
The man said, look, I can almost guarantee that we're going to get a loan from the central bank for $300. You can guarantee you're going to get a loan? Here's the thing. Nothing is free. This budget on the revenue side, everything they're saying in terms of how they're going to raise the revenue, it is not realistic.
Yeah.
For several reasons. Number one, we still have COVID. With COVID still around, economies will still be affected. Making money will still be challenging.
With the coming
Number two, they are using an economic principle. They're using an economic style that doesn't work in Africa. It works in developed countries. This economic style came about. Let me tell you a little story. December 23rd, 1913, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York was created.
Yeah.
Few years later, the United States hit a Great Depression. The depression hit sometime in August of 1929.
Yep.
When the country came out of a depression, everybody was following one strategy for rebuilding a country. It was called the classical economic theory. This British guy, British economist, his name was John Maynard Keynes.
Maynard Keynes, yeah.
He said the way how we can really jumpstart, he said the old theory, the old classical theory, he said it doesn't work. He said what we can do to jumpstart the economy is one of 4 things we can do. The most important thing in that 4 things we can do is to let the government start spending.
Spending, yeah.
If the government increases its expenditure, if they start spending, it will start to grow the economy. So he said that thing at the end of the Depression, like around 1933, when the Depression ended in America. Then he wrote a book about it, and he released that book in 1936. It's a theory. It's a theory on employment, on interest rate, on money. So that theory, it works in developed countries. Why? In 2020, out of 255 countries, only 4 countries had a balanced budget. America has run a deficit since 1970. America has run a deficit for about 50 years. Only 4 instances that America had a surplus. But America can borrow the money. Yeah. You know how America borrows the money? They will come to us on Wall Street. They will go and borrow money using treasury securities. The CBL right now doesn't have that in place. If the CBL wants to borrow, in fact, the government of Liberia is borrowing around, I think, 300 million from the banks in Liberia. They do pay it back. They borrow the money and they do pay it back. But that's a small amount. America ran over $1 trillion deficit. They can borrow the money whenever they need it, and they can print money whenever they need it. America runs a huge deficit. China runs a huge deficit. Japan runs a huge deficit. All these developed countries follow this strategy, this John Maynard Keynes, this theory he came up with in the 30s after the Great Depression. It does not work in Liberia. So the idea that we're just going to boost up the Liberian economy by spending, I haven't seen it work in Africa. In fact, a professor did a research paper in it back in the 50s to see if it would work in India. And it came to pass that all of the research out there proved that this economic theory, this theory does not work in underdeveloped countries. Why? Because we don't have the market to borrow the money like how we can do in the US.
We don't have credit ratings.
We don't have a credit rating. We got a $4.7 billion debt forgiveness. 381 million of that came from the US, IMF, World Bank, 4.7 billion debt forgiveness. It does not work in the US. So anyone looking at the economic theory, the Keynesian theory, it does not work in Liberia. And it will have to tell me, give me evidence, give me empirical data that show that it worked. This budget increasing it by over 48%. You've been running a budget shortfall for 4 years in a row. Yeah. You've been short. Then all of a sudden, miraculously now, you're just going to increase your budget by 48.6%. Where? Come on, man.
So that Larry, you're talking a lot about economics and things like that. So the budget book on the preface, the draft budget starts with in the preface section started with the macroeconomic outlook. If Dennis can bring a sheet of that slide on with the real GDP and things like that. So and if Sam Jackson stay on, that's his area as well. So let's try to make sense of all these real GDP and nominal GDP stuff and how it relates to the budget and how it translates to the livelihood of the people.
Sam, are you there?
I like for Larry to start on that, since he started with all these economic.
Okay, so let me correct a few things.
Okay.
The graph you're looking at is deceptive for several reasons. Real GDP, and I will try to define it, it's not going to the prediction from the IMF saying that real GDP, the 3.2, here's the thing. It is the percentage change in GDP. It's not the growth of the GDP. If you look at the growth over the past 4 years, it will be negative. What you're looking at is the percentage change. So they've run up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
So it's all percentage change. It's not real growth. So that's a misnomer saying real GDP is going to be growing by 3.2. And in fact, that is a prediction. Yesterday, the head of the IMF.
But Lawrence, are you
Yes.
saying if the percentage change is positive, then there's no growth? If the if the numerator or the change from the prior year to the next year is greater over the denominator, then it's positive. Then there is some level of growth.
When we're looking at total output in growth, we're looking
That's what
at
I
it
was
over a
going to.
set period of time.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at the growth over, let's say, 3 years, there hasn't been any growth whatsoever in total production.
Yeah, and Alva asks a very, very good question there. But let me also say that, and I think the reason why, Larry, and this is, I thought we was focused on revenues, on the revenue side, and that's where I thought was going to do before we get to economics.
Yeah, we can go back to that.
But let me say, and the reason why expenditures, right, increased expenditure doesn't work in most African countries in Liberia is that it's not mainly driven by policies. And what happened is that a lot of the resources that they say they spend on X are not truly spent on things that's going to drive economic growth, that's going to enable the people. So we cannot compare what's happening in Liberia to what's happening in the West. It's like apple and oranges. And Ava is right in terms of the growth in real GDP, and because a real GDP is impacted by things people consume. It's also impacted about the business climate of the country. It's also impacted by government spending. So if you see from a Liberia perspective, that number is really driven by government expenditures, and also is driven because there's no net exports in Liberia. We export zero, completely zero, right? And so that real GDP is just something that was just taken from I think the IMF and the World Bank, some numbers they put out there, and it's hard to refute that because one, unless they provide the economic model, right, that we can look at the economic model, we can go ahead. There's something you call, we don't want to be too technical for people, but something that called evidence-based, that we say, okay, how you generate this number? Let's see if I can use the same process, the same methodology, the same X to arrive at the same result. Then that's true. And that's also the problem with the Liberian government budget, right? So these numbers are thrown up there, right? But if you look at, for example, in other countries, they have to model. Even if it's a spreadsheet they use that spreadsheet to put the spreadsheet out there so you can look at what equation was used to be able to generate some of these numbers. But in the case of Liberia, we don't have that, right? These are all PDFs that they can put together and then distribute.
So are you saying that, say in the preface, Abba, I'll give you a chance, but let me read this. In the preface of this document, the macroeconomic outlooks and context, it says growth in 2021 is projected at 3.2%, up from a slump of 3.0% in 2020, with the recovery momentum continuing in 2022 at 4.1%, and over the medium term with an average growth rate of over 4.0%. However, we are expecting some shocks that are emanating from the external sector on account of low external buffers. What does that mean?
It means doodle. Look, the reality is that thing just sounds like Samuel 12 being optimistic, to be honest. Samuel 12 has never seen a positive number he didn't like, and he won't query it. So I don't know what's the foundation for this optimism, given the constraints that on the entire global economy, especially the supply chains, and what it means for pricing in Liberia going over the next, 6 to 12 months. So I can't see how we can be optimistic, even for 3.2%, which is not much, but for us to be like bullish about that, it doesn't make sense at all to me. I need to see more. We have a data problem, right? So they cannot give us the adequate data that can convince you that our economy is moving in that positive direction. What is spurring the economic, growth? Is it new jobs? Is it an enabling business environment for greater level of profits?
Let me hold you there. Aren't these writings coming from the IMF and the World Bank documentation? Because you can sense
But that's
from
not
there
gospel,
in
though.
this. Say again.
It's not gospel.
Yeah,
I
but
agree.
it's not one guy who is being optimistic. It's a group of people called IMF and World Bank that are spitting out these numbers.
So
Have we not had several of those instances where they went back and said, "Oh yeah, we'll change the numbers over the last few years"?
Yeah.
Dennis,
So
can you put
I'm
that?
trying to
Can you
say
put
that
that slide
let's
back
not
up?
put it on account of one guy. Let's look
Put
at
that
the.
slide. Okay,
Okay, I understand
put
your
the
point.
slide
Put it
back up.
aside.
Okay, just put the slide back up, right? And there's one thing I want to agree with. I want to agree with Larry on this, that this whole slide here is actually inaccurate, right? So if you look at the first top, it says real GDP, right? From 18 to 2020, we had a negative, right? But I want you guys to focus on the bottom two, right? The consumer price growth and the consumer price for the next 6 years. If you can see the trend in those consumer prices, right? Whether you're looking at the percentage change or you're looking at the percentage or the price itself, there's been a decrease, right? And if you're saying that your real GDP is going to grow in 2022 or 2021 or 2023, but however your consumer prices are decreasing or the percentage change is actually decreasing, there's a confidence issue with your consumer, right? That means your consumer are not spending enough money. And if your consumer are not spending enough money, there's a high probability that you will not be able to reach your budgetary output, because your consumer spending enables you to be able to collect your taxes. It enables you for your businesses to operate. When they say consumer spending, that means your businesses and your individuals, right? And we
But
know consumers.
are you comparing consumer spending and consumer price? They're two different things, though.
No, I'm looking at the prices, right? If the
Yeah.
prices if the price of the consumer is actually decreasing, that means people don't feel confident enough to spend enough money, right? And we know, if you can, we just had a pandemic here. What happened when the pandemic happened, right? A lot of people were not spending, right? We had to issue the first stimulus package, right? Because they wanted people to go out to spend money. They had to issue another one, right? Because people were sitting home and they felt that if the consumer are not going out to spend, it will impact the economy as a whole. In addition to that, we also had two PPP loans, right, that were given to businesses. But those PPP loans were to keep people on the payroll, even if they were sitting at home, right? They still wanted you to be able to pay them so that people can continue spending. So if your consumer spending isn't continuing, it will going to impact your GDP. It's going to impact your growth. It's going to
Sure.
impact the government. But
Sure.
and again, this is what I want you guys to refer to that. If the trend is actually decreasing, it speaks a lot to the consumer confidence, right? Your consumer confidence is decreasing. People don't have enough confidence in your economy, right? And either that, or they're just withholding their money from spending in the economy, right? So if you're saying that, but you're on the contrary predicting that your budget is going to increase from whether taxes or the other sources of revenue, it kind of contradicts your macroeconomic outlook. So this is one thing I
But we're
wanted to
not.
agree
But
with
we're
Larry.
not.
Let me touch on that real quick, Alexander,
All the two you're
if you don't
talking
mind.
here, I just want you to make it here simple for me and the other people that are listening.
The professor
But
is
you
really
you
out to make
brought
it
the
Bring it
most
simple.
to the
complex
place
chart
where
out that doesn't
we
seem
understand you. So
Let me just say one thing real
justify
quick.
anything, though.
Okay.
Let me say one thing
Larry.
real quick. Gabriel is right there. He's right on it. And you put the chart up. I will point it out to you real quick. Your nominal GDP should always should be higher than your real GDP, because your nominal GDP has no inflation added in there.
Correct.
So your nominal GDP should be higher. So if my real GDP is around 3%, let's say inflation is like 2% or so,
Yeah.
my nominal GDP should be let's say at around 5%.
Yeah.
But look at the chart. Look at what nominal GDP growth is. I think if I remember when you put it up, it was around
Can you
0
bring
or
the
something.
chat back, Dennis?
So it tells me that That is just a percentage change. It's not actually the real growth, which is fine. Again, but historically, and I put a post out there about this, historically, the IMF has been consistently wrong in their prediction. Why?
Thank you.
Because back in December of 2013, when Ebola came through Foya in Lofa, the IMF prediction was Liberia economy was going to be growing at 6-7%. Ebola hit. What happened? They had to revise it. What happened? We had the even before that, we had the Great Recession. The recession started in December.
But Ebola saved Liberia. Ebola saved Liberia in a weird way because the economy was tanking. Right,
the economy tanked. Remember now, the economy tanked after Ebola. The economy only rebounded like around 2017. That's when we had a positive growth in total output. So the IMF has been consistently wrong. In fact, the head of the IMF just came out yesterday, and she said, based on the new Omicron variant,
That's a revision.
Yeah. There has to be a revision.
Yep.
Correct.
So they're going to downgrade the projection. But again, let's not dwell too much on that
Let's
sheet.
bring it back on the budget. I just wanted to bring that out there to point out that inconsistency.
So, Samuel Jackson. Samuel Jackson.
You're muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, I'm a little bit confused here because you talk about consumer price increase and consumer confidence. I don't know if those two, things are interchangeable. I really don't know that. Consumer confidence would be reflected in aggregate demand, right? In terms of the value of goods and services that will be reduced because people have income, they will be purchasing that. The consumer price index is the inflation index. So I don't understand why you're confusing the two, but I don't really argue tonight, but but let me just finish here. Look, what they did with rebase the GDP, as you know, they went straight from like 900 million to like 3 billion. That's what the IMF told them. And IMF, some multilateral thing, and just basically don't understand what's the objective reality of the country. So they do things to basically tick all the boxes, this is done, this is done, this is done, because they need to continue to engage every country, to indicate that they're doing something for poor countries, because you and I know that the IMF and World Bank really have never really developed any country. It's about looking at the economy and customizing and development agenda, a development agenda that is filled to your people. Okay, but look, everything that you guys are saying, I understand it. The Liberian economy, as it is structured, is not going to make any meaningful impact on the lives of Liberian people. That's just the way it is. Okay, if you have from 1944, you have a extractive industry, the extractive industry with no value addition. Okay, and if you look at all of the structural defects of the economy, okay, lack of infrastructure, rose in electricity penetration only 12%. You have high youth unemployment. All of these things conspire to keep Liberia a poor country. We need radical approaches to Liberia forward. Unfortunately, none of the governments before in the pre-war and the post-war have had the owners to do what are required to move it forward. So we have this budget. Which is a reflection of how we as a people, right? Liberia is mostly a patronage state. It's been a patronage state that was started by the Southern administration. Keep increasing. That came from $30 million in 2005 to about $600 million by the end of the LA administration. And in the beginning, what they dies. That was the thing to have a lean and mean, efficient bureaucracy. But you start coming to 2011, it increased the public sector wage bill almost 70% of recurring expenditure. Okay.
Yeah.
This current budget is not a real budget based upon real economic circumstances in the country. It is it's a COVID-19 induced budget with $145 million for dealing with Ebola, we're dealing with the COVID-19 virus. So you have
Yeah.
$145 million, which is yeast in the budget. $145 million.
Dang.
That's alone. So the $785 million figure, you have to subtract the 145. Then you have to look at core revenue. So for me, the fact that core revenue has increased is, to me, is a degree of progress. Now, should the increases in revenues in terms of the donor support and all of those budget support should have been used more appropriately for public sector investment and other socioeconomic development? Of
Absolutely.
course.
Yeah.
But the nature of politics in Liberia, you have 2022 as the last year before the 2023 election. So governments would do pork barrel spending to appease their constituency and their electorate. And this is what we see. This happens in the United States of America. The multiple billion infrastructure budget. You saw all the pork barrel legislation that were being attached to it. You saw Christian and Joe Manchin disagreeing, and people were arguing over not enough money for is to impress upon legislators that they can a sharp knife and go to the budget macroscopically and see where on the expenditure side, whether they carve enough of the expenditure side to put into social spending or public sector investment. So fundamentally, I don't have any major disagreement with the panelists tonight in terms of the budget not being a budget that prioritizes the priorities of the Liberian people. So we have no disagreement. I just want you to say that this budget is a lot better budget than the budgets of the 12 years of the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf administration. That's what I want to be very clear about.
We knew that was coming.
So Sam, let's since you started on the revenue side, that would take us into the revenue side. Yes, the government in this budget is saying about, I'm still juggling where that percentage is coming from, but for the sake of the budget and the discussion, it says there's an increase in our revenue by 46.7%. That's almost 47%. And one of the things we try to do is to say, okay, where is this increase coming from? What has changed in the country? What are these areas that we getting money from? So we let's look into the revenue side, because the revenue will give rise to the expenditure. We know that most of the increase they're talking about is being put into a recurring expenditure a lot, with a little increase in the public sector investment plan. So let's look into the revenue. Summer Jackson is still having trouble, but Dr. King.
Yeah. So let's if you lay some focus on the budget, on the revenue side, again, you see, as I said earlier, a lot of it is driven by the key commodity increase in taxes on the key commodities, on maybe royalties, and all of that's charged from that perspective, and also from import duties. Is ship something today, just on the broad surface, just look at the cost of shipping something to Liberia today is tremendous. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to squeeze all of that. They're trying to squeeze the Liberian people, and that's where this actual increase is coming from. One, on the key commodities around iron ore, around rubber, in some respect, and then also around gold and diamonds on another aspect. So they're where they're trying to put that. They're where they're trying to do that. And the other, again, as I said, in terms of taxes for shipping stuff, and also in terms of the business tax that they charge. So they're where they're trying to squeeze all of this in. But when you look at the number, it's not realistic. And I think a lot of it, and folks are saying they coke the books, that this is what they don't. And you can see a lot of it is in there. So it doesn't really make sense that a year ago, you wasn't generating the amount of revenue again. And then all of a sudden, and I think it was Larry who spoke about it, you have global crisis, right? In some of the most developed countries of the world, there's a lot of challenges there. In even being able to generate the kind of revenue you want to generate. But then they're coming up with this expectation that we can increase our revenue by an extraordinary amount within about a year. Realistically, it really doesn't make sense, because one, you have not, for example, done anything with the private sector, right? Unemployment is very, very high. Okay, in Liberia, for the formal sector, not the informal sector, because we can go to the formal sector, and look at unemployment, both of those, and where the IMF and World Bank and their calculation they come up with as well. But you see all of those, so it doesn't realistically make sense that it able to generate the kind of revenue that the city will generate in a short amount of time. And again, even the projection for the future, as I stated earlier, doesn't realistically make sense, because there's projection that iron ore price is going to fall in the next 1 or 2 years. So where you really getting this from that? And I think it really doesn't make sense realistically.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Jones, if you look at the budget, right? I mean, if you look at the revenue side of the budget, you will see some specific areas. And I like for Dennis to bring the revenue aspect on, but you will see some specific aspect of increases on the sheet. If Dennis can bring that up, I see that there will be increases.
Steven, welcome.
Specifically, as you can see there will be increases in taxes on income and profits. Okay, that means that there will be companies will be paying more money on their profit they make. And that means that, of course, pay as you earn, there will be more employees' taxes that will be paid to the government. If you see taxes on goods and services, right, there's a proposal to increase the goods and services tax to 11%.
Exactly.
All right. What is the implication of that? There will be taxes on international trade. I mean, increase on taxes on international trade. That means there'll be increases on import duties and other custom charges on imports. What would that mean? Would that mean that the people who are bringing the goods in would then increase the prices, and therefore the inflation is going to go up? Prices of goods and services on the Liberian market are going to go up, and the people are going to suffer. What is the implication of this? And
the implication for this and on the economic center is that the businesses is going to pass that on to the people, to the consumer.
Yeah.
So the average Liberian is going to feel the pain and the burden for that increase, right? Because remember this, the profit maximizing objective of any organization, any business, is to make a profit, right? So you don't want to spend all you have on just expenses and expenditure, but you also want to make some revenue to be able to make some profits. So what's going to happen in the current term, even not long run, it's just right now in the short term, is that cost is going up. You look at simple thing like rice. The price of rice has really gone up tremendously in Liberia, and the price of key commodities have also gone up in Liberia, right? But then also the other side about this, though, is that Alex and Gabriel, is that you continue to go to the same well for the same water. Eventually, it's going to dry up, right? To speak. So they keep going to, just look at it in Liberia, where you have Meter Steel, you have Firestone, you keep going to them and charging them again for export fees, and then you're charging them again on royalties, you're charging them for all these other things, so it's going to have an impact. It's particularly on iron ore, that price is going to fall, right? So how are you going to generate that revenue? It really doesn't make sense. And the bulk of our people are going to be feeling the pain, because remember, Liberia produced nothing.
Yeah. Larry, I would like you to come to take. I would like to hear your take on that, and then after that, we'll go to Steven. Steven, thank you for joining us. Then you can introduce yourself and go as well.
Yeah, Larry.
It's like the second division team just wake up one morning and say they're going to go to the Premier League, and they will defeat Arsenal. I know Arsenal had a bad day, Chelsea had a bad day. It's not going to happen. You're depending on so many things to happen in order to win the game. The fact that Liberia depends so much on the extractive sector. At the end of November, Liberia received, I think it's about $23 million, special drawing rights, equivalent of US dollar, like $23 million. It's a loan.
Yeah.
It's a loan they received. But when you read the report on Liberia, that report says we're close to being a high risk of not being able to pay our bills.
Thank you.
The debt to GDP ratio is very high. We're not able to pay. And when you miss your payment, matter of fact, if I remember, I'm trying to remember the IMF document that said I think they missed a payment. I don't know if it was in 2020 or 2019. They did miss a payment, but it wasn't treated as a missed payment. When you miss a payment, your creditors will not be willing to lend you money.
Yeah.
It will strangle you. So right now, this money, this budget, this revenue they're projecting, they expect to borrow a good portion of it.
Yeah.
It's going to increase the risk of Liberia falling into a debt trap.
Yeah.
Who was it recently? I think it was Uganda that took a $200 million loan from China.
China, yeah.
And I think China is going to go seize the airport. So you can't stop borrowing. You cannot borrow your way out of debt. It's not going to happen. So here's the thing. Number one, somebody has to pay for it. And how are they going to pay for it? By increasing taxes. And you see, just what Alexander was mentioning, they're looking to increase taxes. But in order to increase tax, you got to have businesses running and operating in order to tax them.
Yeah.
Foreign direct investments to Liberia has fallen almost over 100 million. It's on the U.S. report. Larry's not saying it. Go read the U.S. report. Doing business report from the World Bank say Liberia has a very poor rating in terms of doing business. But our economy depends so much on what other countries are doing. If anything happens to any one of those countries, like what Dr. King said.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything happened to China, because China now is concerned about pollution. Dr. King said it. It will impact the price of the amount of iron ore we're selling. BF Goodrich. Is it BF Goodrich? BF Goodrich is based in Japan. The people that own Firestone.
Yep.
If anything happens, I mean, right now, BF Goodrich, when you look at their annual statement, BF Goodrich are projecting they're going to make some money. They believe the price of rubber is going to go up. So they expect to make some money. But when I had that conversation with Costa, he mentioned because of this pricing, some pricing mechanism we have in Liberia can still be cheated out of revenue.
Yeah.
But it's all dependent on other countries. If anything happened to any other country, we're not producing the things that we consume. America can produce the things they consume. When the price of oil is going up, what happened? America has the ability to go to a strategic reserve and release oil. We don't have that ability.
Yeah.
If any country out there sneezes, Liberia will catch a cold.
Yeah. And Gabriel, let me build up. Yeah, Alex, let me build up quickly.
I can't give a statement. I
want to build up. I want to build up a little bit on what Professor Kennedy Larry just said. But also, let's look at it. I might be wrong with the number though, because if you increase taxes and you put that burden on the local folks and Liberians, I mean, that's, for example, I think, and I have to look at the number though. I might be off, but I have to look at the number. In terms of remittances under Ellen Johnson Sirleaf government, I think the remittances, and even up until last year, the remittances to Liberia, right, was around in excess of 400 million, right? I looked at it this year. The remittances to Liberia, I think hold me for this, but it's around $25 million. Okay. And a lot of Liberians are dependent on these remittances for their livelihood. Now imagine what happens if you continue to push them, increase the price of their very basic commodities because we produce nothing, right? Imagine what that impact would be, and the objective of this whole government is say pro-poor. So imagine what the impact of that would be.
Yeah.
So once again, there are if you look at the revenue side of the budget, there are key areas about 4 or 5 areas that have increased, that is giving rise to the increase in the budget of 2022 as compared to 2021, 2020. Once again, it's in the area of taxes on income and profit, taxes on goods and services, taxes on international trade. Of course, there will be property income, that is a lot of it coming from the Freeport of Monrovia, from just budget, SOE's budget contribution, LPRC, Freeport, the road fund, and a big chunk will be coming from royalties and rent. That is on account of the mining industry. And then we will be borrowing. Contingent revenue loans of 145 million will be coming from the IMF and the World Bank. Now, the Center for Policy Action and Research, CIPA, wrote a paper which comes close to kind of diving into where these increases will be coming from. And we have Mr. Stephen Johnson. He left out the page.
No, that's just my second page.
Stephen Johnson is invited here to come and throw some light on a breakdown of where these increases is coming from and give us an impression of the budget. Mr. Johnson.
So thank you, Alex, and it's good to see you all. Thanks. It's good to see you, Gabriel and Larry, and also Mr. King. As Alex have readily stated, I'm Stephen. We run a policy think tank called CIPA. It was established in 2018, and ever since then, we've been involved with doing economic analysis about the budget. We did a paper on the Eton and Eboma loan that the government wanted to take. And so recently we released on Friday, which was yesterday, a 14-page document on the current budget. So several things to unpack it, and I must say I've been following the show closely, and I think all of you have made significant contribution to the national conversation. So, just for our audience, this is the largest budget in our history. So just, so that we're clear on that, 785 million or 785.6 million that has been projected. So it's good for us to unpack that figure. So as Sam said earlier, 145 million of that amount comes from external sources. So IMF, World Bank, those are grants. There are three key areas where outside of those of the external sources where a bulk of our revenue are expected to come from. The first area is, and Alex talked about it, 492 million is expected to come from tax revenue. So you're talking about taxes collected from income and profit. And then you also 227 million of that amount is expected to come from international trade. So trade on import and export, profit on export, import monopolies, and all of those other areas like Semenco, all those big other areas. Then the other area that saw a significant increase is the mining sector. So you have about 116 million coming from the mining sector. So if you disaggregate that 116 million, you see that 24 million of that is personal income tax. So Metal Steel recently signed an $800 million expansion MDA, the Mineral Development Agreement with the government. So that is expected to, expand their operation in nearby other parts of the country, like Basa, where they operate. So the government is projecting that that will see an increase in personal income tax. And then 11 million of that will come from withholding on services, 79. Now, the biggest chunk of that, 79 million, comes from rent and royalties. So, quarterly or most of these concession pay royalties to the government. So that's in a nutshell is the total outlook of the budget. Now, if you look at the budget, if you take a deep dive, you will notice that about 80% of the budget, 80% of the current budget goes towards recurring expenditure. So just to keep the government operational, the government itself operational, you're spending about 80% of your total revenue on government operations. Now, 20% of that money goes to what we call the PSIP, the Public Sector Investment Program. Now, if you look at those numbers technically, let's assume if we were to deflate the budget of the 145 million that we're getting from external sources, it means technically we're spending the entire budget just to keep the government alive.
Yep.
But Stephen, they people in there bring some down, or they deflate and other things.
Oh no, I mean that if you minus, let's assume you minus because the 20% on the PSIP portion of the budget is around 142 million. That is almost like the 145 million we're collecting from external sources through borrowings. So if you minus that from our budget, let's assume that money did not come, right? Let's just assume for the sake of argument that money did not come. It means what you have now, you're spending almost all of your revenue on the government.
Government, just to keep it running.
Just to keep the government running. Now, and if you also, because the budget should reflect the national agenda and the focus of the country. So let me just also state here that, for instance, in another area I would think you guys should look at more is the expenditure side of the budget, because that is where most of the sticky issues are. Because, for instance, the revenue side, it's difficult to do a critical analysis of the revenue side of the budget without having the outterms, the fiscal outterms. Mm-hmm. So, if I come to you and say, Alex, I can raise $50 million, it's difficult for you to argue against me, because I'm telling you that I can raise $50 million now.
Without any,
the first thing you want to see is the performances. What are the assumptions behind those numbers? What is driving it? And up to now, I've not seen those outterms, those fiscal outterms, to show what are driving revenue, and then what are the assumptions given the fact that there is a shock. There's a global shock in the supply chain. So how are we expected to increase, for instance, our international trade revenue on customs and excise, when at the same time you see there's this shock across the globe with a relapse of the pandemic? So those are other assumptions we have to look at from the revenue side to see what drove those numbers. Now, on the expenditure side, one other areas that we need to look at is the legislature. The legislature alone, in terms of just what they need to maintain the vehicle, fuel, and lubricant, that amount alone is 101% more than all of the money allocated for community colleges in the country.
There you go.
Then that amount is also 285% more than the spending budget for training institute, and 11% more than the budget for the Moreover Consolidated School System. So that is just to tell you that just for legislature on upkeep, not necessarily the salary, just the cars and the lubricants and fuel, they're getting far more to do those things than other area. Now, in other areas where
the 30,000 is not in that money.
No, it's not there. So that's just for lubricant, fuel, and the vehicles. I think they're getting new vehicles, all 103 of them.
Jesus Christ.
And then also, if you look at areas where they may increase, for instance, in health and education, the increase are not reflected in terms of improvement in those sectors. It's only reflected in terms of salaries.
So they're not going. In other words, they're not going towards services, providing services.
No, they're not going towards providing services. They're just basically, showing that personnel costs increasing. So obviously those amount. So another thing also you need to look at also too is the lawmaker lubricants, fuel, and vehicle is 29% more than it's 29% more than what Jackson F. Doe and Joe F. Kennedy, the nation's two biggest referral hospital, will be getting in this budget. So if you see the chart up there, if you look at the graph that Alex just shared, you see the blue column there represents legislature, vehicle, fuel, and lubricant. So you're talking about you see where it has the 7.8 million up there. You see if you look at the yellow area we talked, which is just the MCC, the Missouri Consolidated School System. So you're talking about Tottenham High, Matilda, Nipo, GW Casey, all of those public schools. Yeah, all the government schools across the country, they're getting 3.8. Now, if you also look at the all your training institute, your MVDC, your all those technical institute, they're getting 2 million, and then you see that all your colleges combined, William V.S. Tottenham, the University of Liberia, your Bond County, the one in Basel, they're getting 7 million. So in a nutshell, just what the legislature will be spending on themselves in terms of their vehicle fuel and the lubricant is far more than what critical areas that should drive change, that should drive reform, in terms of a proper budget, that will reflect growth in terms of the livelihood of the ordinary people. So that's just a snapshot of what we did. So, but if you read the report, and I think I share with Gabriel and Alex, it is important for us to, because one of the things we did, we provided so we provided opinion. Yeah, we provided opinions on it. So
Steve, we're not going to go into the entire report. So let me hold you there. Okay. Let me hold you there a little bit. The funny question that I wanted to pose to you is, how would the executive branch prepare a budget that will favor the legislative branch so much like that? Why?
It's the way historically the budget is done on a quid pro quo basis.
Scratch my back.
So
I mentioned that.
Yeah, it's a quid pro. So it's where for you to get it to be approved, the lawmaker will have to make trade-offs. So it's more to appease them so that they can get it passed.
And that trade-off is their personal benefit, not for their not for the constituents.
It's for them as lawmakers, not their constituents.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
That's a lot. Thank you. That was a lot of in-depth analysis. So thank you for coming on.
I agree.
So I can
just say something real quick.
No, you can stay on.
No, listen to Steve. I am shocked. Yeah, I'm shocked. You did not make a comparison to the 2006 to 2017 budget of your government. Because
Sam, we're not here for we're discussing 2022 budget.
He has to, because this is public.
No, but Sam, we're discussing 2022 budget.
We can do that on another show.
Sam. If you want to,
I can find a time here myself and have this conversation.
No. If he's going to write no, guys, this is not fair. If he's going to spend 40, if he's going to write a 14-page document and come and downplay this budget, he should have done a comparative analysis between this budget and their spending budget. Because right here in my hand,
Sam, we're not doing a comparative. We're looking at what the budget is, the kind of impact it's making on the livelihood of the people. We're not doing. We're not comparing regimes.
So,
you say you have 785 million budget. We're saying what this 785 million would do. No. We're not comparing regime. No, we're not comparing regime. We're saying you come to me and say I can produce. The economy has the capacity to produce 785 million
budget that you had in 2017. What did it do?
Sam, if we're discussing what we have,
if you don't want to argue, if you don't argue curious, that's fine. That's fine.
Sam, we're not here to debate regime.
I put my hand up in surrender. I'm totally outnumbered, outgunned. That's
no, that regime.
That's fine. That's fine.
Everything we're doing here is objective.
And tell the public this is a bad budget when they operated 12 consecutive bad budgets. You can't.
Everything we're doing here is objective.
This is comical.
Professor Sam, we'll find a day where we'll do budget by budget analysis.
Really comical.
Sam,
Professor Kennedy and Dr. Kent, you guys have heard what Stephen have said.
Let me just make a short statement.
Do you guys have any comments to that, to what Stephen have just, the depth analysis that he given?
Yeah, I do. But I think Alex wanted to say something.
You may have covered some of that, but I just want to hear your take on that. I will start with Dr. King.
Yeah. Let me say that, and Sam makes a good point though. Sometimes when you do these things, you got to do a comparison and a clear comparison analysis historically. and sometimes it's good to do that. But then so folks wouldn't question you. But I'll say what the analysis from I think CPI was excellent. Stephen, I'll say excellent work that was done.
Thank you.
But it was not strange because in all our previous government we had recurrent expenditure was almost the largest percentage of the total budget. But I think the way is that my thing here is that the way we do, I don't know, the way we do this is to change the system. And I think we really got to be able to do this. And I gave you an example how I think we can do this. We have to, and again, it takes political will to be able to do it. But the government, the Bureau of the Budget will have to be an autonomous agency that operates outside of the executive, right? And I think it's the same thing you have that the legislative branch would really depend on them for the kind of decisions, so the analysis, the metrics, and all of that. Because remember, the House of Representatives holds the purse. They should be in most countries of the world, they have the power to be able to ask the tough questions, to be able to do those things. And so if you have that, then you have a budget bureau present this, and then you have a team that can really analyze the budget and come up with exactly the pros and cons and all of that. And additionally, in most places that are run, countries of the world that run effectively, most budgets are driven by policies. And the policies are driven from the House of Representatives to say, well, listen, we're going to import, this is how much money we're going to spend to youth unemployment in our country. This is how much we're going to spend to creating making the private sector robust so that we can generate more revenue, yada yada, stuff like that. So we need that kind of stuff to happen. If we don't have that system change, and hopefully in the future with all what's happening, that you have that, then you're always going to have this problem where you're going to have a budget that's based on pro quo, where people are saying, well, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, I want this for my stuff. And so that's how it always have been to a lot of the other speakers' perspective. And it's enormous. And I looked at the whole entire budget, and I think, Stephen, what was also missed there, if I look at it, in terms of social spending, I think social spending, if I can look at that, was a very small amount. Mm-hmm. I think 1.2% of the entire budget is social spending. Huge. It's just amazing. They also, you look in Liberia to talk about all the stuff that's happening there, sex educations and all the stuff that happening in women abuse. I looked at that budget, and I think in terms of social spending, $200, if I'm not wrong, was being spent on that. I think on youth enablement, I think around $750. Come on, right? But the bulk of it, based on Stephen's analysis, the bulk of it is going towards the House of Representatives and all the other stuff to do. So it's nothing strange there. You know, this is how we always have done business, but we have to change. We have to do this. We have to turn around, find a way to be able to do it the right way. And that would be my analysis.
Yeah.
And let me just interject there quickly and say there are other revenue streams that were not captured in the budget. So we hope that the lawmaker will take a look. For instance, we're printing new money, and every time you print new money, you get seniorage income on money. So we need to see what is the seniorage income on the new money. The second thing also is the stuff at the port where they charge on the container. We don't see that reflected in the budget, and then the money generated from the airport through for the COVID testing. And another key thing that we see come up in this budget is that the airport tax. We see that you'll be charged $25 for airport tax. So it puts additional burden on the already distressed pocket of many Liberians who are feeling the brunt of the economic downturn, not just in Liberia but across the globe.
Thank
Professor
you, Larry.
Kennedy.
Larry, we got to take a break after. Larry, if you have any impression to make on, then we'll take a break. When we come back, we're looking at expenditure in details.
You want me to
And
say something now,
Yes,
or you want me
yeah,
to?
go ahead, and after we'll go for a break. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll take comments from our from the guests. I mean from the people who are commenting on the show.
So real quick, the people should thank Stephen because this 463 pages behemoth of a budget is nothing but copy and paste. So he must have taken the time to really go into Excel and actually manually put all this stuff in, which is a lot of work.
What happened?
The budget is put out in such a way that it makes it extremely difficult for somebody to go in there and do some analytical work. Not unless you have so much time or you have a team that will work with you and allow you to create this stuff. So my hat off to Stephen for doing that. Okay.
Yeah, we have
the
a
second
team.
thing is Stephen mentioned a good point. I remember seeing someone from the finance ministry on another talk show saying that, printing money is very expensive. Saying they were spending $10 million to print money. What they failed to realize or what they failed to mention, I don't know if it was intentional or not, printing money by governments is one of the most lucrative business you can ever get into.
Yeah.
Imagine if it costing you 10 cents to print $100. Is that expensive? No, you're going to make a whole lot. So the difference between what it costs to print and the money you actually earn when you get that money is that thing that Stephen mentioned earlier, the seniorage.
Mm-hmm.
They're not reporting how much money they made. They're not saying anything about that. The other thing is this budget is not driven off data. The government has no data warehouse where they can go into and they can say, how many jobs we created. They don't have any of that stuff. They're using like someone like George Fambulet mentioned. I mean, they're using guesstimate. They're guessing. Who guesses with the lives of people? That is absolute nonsense. The budget spends more. The whole idea of ProPo, you're supposed to invest in your people. ProPo is all about uplifting the poor people from the status they're in by investing in programs, whether it's education, healthcare, that will benefit them. When you look at this budget, it's not pro-poor. It's pro-legislators and it's pro-executive. That's what the budget is all about. That is a big no-no. What they should be investing in is the internet. I mentioned this the other day. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, Alphabet, this big internet company, is in Monrovia right now. When you see people around Monrovia with shovels digging to put fiber optics, it's being paid for between Alphabet and a company now, USAID is also involved in that, and another company called C Squared.
Right.
If you increase the internet, it will lead to a job. Students will be able to have online learning. Countries that develop, they did it through education. The world has changed. You got to put money into education.
Yeah.
So I mean, the budget is it's just an exercise in people just, I don't want to use a big word, but they're ingratiating, they're making themselves feel good. It's all wasteful spending on the expenditure side, on the spending side. It's wasteful. It's nothing that's going to elevate the people. And at the end of the day, all this money, 145 million or so they're borrowing, somebody has to pay for it. How are they going to pay for it? They're going to raise taxes or they're going to raise interest in the country, interest rate in the country. And that's not going to lead to a development. Liberia entered the IMF program in 2019 because of bad fiscal policies. I don't know what the central bank is even doing in our country when the Ministry of Finance seems to be doing monetary and fiscal policies at the same time. It's an absolute joke. Who runs a country like that? The reason why you have 12 different Federal Reserve districts in America, the banks in every district, they buy a stock into the central bank in America. They buy a stock just so the government will not hold the central bank for ransom. But I want a central bank. I don't know who's running the central bank. It's like a big joke over there. This budget is going to lead to a lot of people being angry come 2023, and it's going to be reflected in the voting. It's going to show.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Larry. So we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll go into expenditure. We'll give a synopsis of what we learned from the revenue. And these discussions are about having some conversation around the budget so that it informs the people's deputies, the legislature, of course, who are benefiting from this budget that much, but at least they inform them to ask the necessary question. So when we come back, we will do a synopsis of the revenue side and we'll go into the expenditure.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jar.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Focus on Liberia. We've been having a discussion on the national budget, well, the draft budget. And I think we have so far covered the expenditure part. And Stephen, again, thank you for the work you guys did at CFA. That was very, you took, I think that was, I usually call it a book. You took a book and just put, compress it into 14 pages. Yeah. So, and that was great analysis work. So thank you for giving that in depth. And I think Dr. King and Professor Kennedy did a good job to, giving us a background and digging deep into this budget as well. I think the next thing we want to do, I'm sure you do have that, right? Because I think I saw it, the expenditure part of it, if we can take a little, maybe 3 minutes top overview of the expenditure side of it. Let's try to make some sense out of it. And I would like to hear Dr. King and Professor Kennedy's feedback on that as well.
So you want me to go?
Yeah, yes, please, if you have it. Sam, again, welcome back. Right.
So on the expenditure side of the budget, which is essentially where all of the and interestingly in our finding we realized that as I said earlier, 80% of revenue going towards recurring expenditure. So you're talking basic salary, you're talking about vehicles, consumables, stationaries, and other things, that will keep the government afloat. Gas, you're talking about fuel and lubricant, you're talking about all of those things. And then basic salaries. So let me also
it's actually 82%.
Yes, 82%. So let me also say here that, for instance, the legislature salary increased from 6.8, the elected official, from 6.8 million to 7.5. That is a 9% increment. The staff at the legislature that are civil servant, their salary dropped by 3% from 9.2 to 9.0 million. Now, let me also give this news flash. The president pro tempore of the Liberian Senate makes 30% more than the pro tem in the U.S.
Interesting.
The speaker of the Liberian legislature, the House of Representatives, makes 10% more than the speaker in the U.S., than Nancy Pelosi. And the deputy speaker makes 8% more than the deputy speaker in the U.S. Now, these are people who technically performing similar functions to the extent of how their function are impacting the general good of the country. We can argue that, yeah. But so in a nutshell, most of what we're generating are essentially going towards what we need to run government. We need to run government. So the 144 million, the 142 million for PSIP. You're talking about roads. You're talking about other basic constructions that will take place. Those are not capital investment that will drive growth.
Right.
Yeah, because for you to make that leapfrog into making Liberia a country where we have sustained economic growth, we have to invest more in capital investment, because what will happen is that it creates job, it creates income, and then it creates opportunity for government to collect more revenue. So that is essentially what we taught. So when we did this study, one of the things we were focused on was we wanted to see the relationship between this budget and the government agenda.
That was my biggest focus. But yeah, go ahead.
So what is the connect between an agenda that seeks to promote a poor versus
Right.
what is in here for them?
Right.
And so when you do the deep dive into this budget, you realize that essentially in the next 12 months, essentially you wouldn't have any real economic change in the livelihood of the Liberian people, rather than just those who are already employed receiving salary, and those who are elected officials and political appointees, receiving more chunk of the revenue. So on the expenditure side, most of our monies are going into recurring expenditure, compensation, goods and services, all those things. So if you look at there, you see compensation, you see how much you're spending on compensation. You're spending 291 on compensation. On goods and services, you're spending 127 million there. So those two alone, you're talking somewhere around 400 million, which is over 80% of your domestic revenue.
And then the bulk of that is going to the public sector administration, which includes the national legislature, the Ministry of State for Presidential Affairs.
Basically the executive.
The executive, yeah.
Yeah, and then the legislature, executive, and the judiciary. So that's the public sector. So you see bulk of your money going back. So unless we take deliberate action, and maybe I'll close on this note. Let me say this. For real change to happen, there has to be a coalition of people who are willing to see change, and that coalition will not just have to be at the executive, it has to be across government. You have to see it in the legislature, you have to see it at the ministry and agency, you have to see it in the judiciary, you have to see it across government. So let's say you have a team of 50 change agents who will spread across the country to show that we really want this country to move forward. That's the only way. Other than that, year in, year out, the people will only see these budget numbers on paper in terms of whether they will change their livelihood. I disagree. So yeah, let me wrap on this note.
Yeah, Steve, that would take me to a comment from Dave Jar. He writes that people don't understand the connection between the budget and their lives, so they often waste their votes on sentimental things like few light poles, patched roads, and parties. There are plenty of uninformed voters in Liberia.
So yeah, that's an interesting comment, and I think it speaks to the bigger problem about how when people are kept in certain conditions for a long time, how it is difficult for them to actually see what is development. And so most often you see that even mediocre things are seen as huge stuff. For instance, if I went to Liberia and built a latrine in a community, the next thing you know that I will receive a petition to run as a representative in that district. So, and this is where a lot of us thought that the purple agenda will focus more on the grassroots, on the everyday Liberians, because at that level, the extent to which the budget impact their life is almost non-existent or very minimal. So, for instance, the only way that person's life is impacted by the budget is through transitory income. Stephen works for government. He takes his pay. He goes to West Point to meet a friend. He sees the other guy. He gives him maybe $10. That's the only way that man will have any real impact of the budget, through transitory income. But not necessarily to say that government is engaging in huge spending within his community that will create jobs, opportunity, that will create livelihood for them. No, that is not happening. And unfortunately, it's deja vu all over again. We keep making the same mistake and hoping that real change will come. And unless we focus more on the people and less on the elected official, we'll continue to have this kind of situation.
No, thank you. I think, Alex, what we should do, let's just read through the entire comments, and then we can, get, pick some for each individual to respond to. I think that should be the.
Yeah, in fact, I was coming just to that Joe Manju.
Okay, then go ahead.
One. Yeah. Entrepreneurship is the key to Liberia's growth, development, and prosperity. The country has 330 miles of ocean front, West Africa's largest virgin forest. The country needs entrepreneurs who can connect the dots that will enable the people of Liberia to profit from the country's natural assets. Another one.
You want me to read it? You want me to read this what?
Yes, please read all the comments.
Group of clueless, pessimistic guys, with the exception of Samuel Jackson, who is looking at a different and more broader angle in discussing our budget. What a pity. Okay.
I love it. I love it.
Let me speak to that, and that's the nature of the beast, right? And that's the kind of people. That's our people. That's the thinking. That's kind of built off of what Dennis was saying in his comment earlier, that our people don't really see it. They assume that everything that's going on, what these guys are doing, is the way it's supposed to go. Yeah. But no. But let me also say that we always talk about change, and I said it when I last engaged on this forum about innovative ways in which we can change our country. Change is the only constant. So, and Plato said that. But that's the only way we do it.
Coming back.
And yeah, I think let's read the entire comment. Okay, then we will give you guys different. You can pick whichever comment you want. We'll give you guys time to pick whichever comment you want to respond
fair
to.
Enough.
Right.
Liberia's basically an input-based economy. This means there be increase in commodity prices, which in effect will cause more hardship for the Liberian people. So the budget will not help, rather it will hurt the people. The Liberian people will be worse off.
True. Any more? Should Liberia nationalize her natural resources?
Nationalize her natural resources. Okay, Dave has that question. What are your thoughts on the revenue from CTN? That's what Mr. Johnson was alluding to, and $150 per person COVID-19 fee not being captured in the budget, especially when there are reliable data after a year of those programs. Benedict Phillips said, this gives me hope for Liberia. Just listening to these well-meaning, intelligent, and patriotic Liberian brothers, please don't give up on our country. Samuel Twe is spewing out these large amounts to impress Haitians who will never understand what he's doing, while Liberians at large feel the pain. Solo Brown writes, the only opposition who always tell the truth if the government is doing good or not is Samuel Jackson. William Dunbar writes, this leadership Ellen Johnson Sirleaf forged upon Liberian in 2017 will ultimately be a major toll. Marcus Julie Weir writes, can a budget of $700 million help to construct our roads in Liberia? That's a question. Agatha Shelley writes, Mr. King, if they gave you that position, I'm sure she's referring to Minister of Finance, what will you do different, as Minister of Finance?
So Dr. King, take note of that question. I would like you to respond to that. Yeah.
So Neil Brooks writes, the same Samuel Jackson man was in Ellen Johnson government, and he's here with Samuel Twe in George Weah government also.
Okay.
Benjamin Jirople Waji writes, shouldn't consumer price decrease stimulate greater consumer spending? That's a question.
It should.
It should determine if it depends if people have income, because consumption is a function of income.
Well,
And,
Mr. Abatuba is not able to log on, but somebody is following up from Ganta Nimakante. Of course, I mean Ganta is Ganta. So Lincoln, Eugene Kamara, how many jobs were created in 2021?
that's a great question. All right.
Anthony Gay, boom. I made it just in time for the awesome discussion. Liberia has talents across the globe. All we need is the right leader, president, to adequately utilize those talents. Okay.
I think that exhausts the questions. Go ahead,
Go
Alex.
ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I think that exhausts the questions or comments here. Did Dr. Ken, I want you to respond to that question.
Yeah, that was a great question, and
that was targeted towards you, and then I will hear Steven. Steven, you can pick any question statement you want to.
You got to pick this one. Maya
And then we will
Jackson,
do the
does
same for-
Sinarish has anything to do with the budget increase? Yeah, you will come back. Just take note of that. Benedict, unfortunately, our elected officials are a sample of who we are.
I agree.
All right, brother Stephen Johnson. We need a lot of change agent in every aspect of life in Liberia to succeed.
David Jad again.
Oh, you are right, Mr. Johnson. David Jad writes, change has to come from a broad sway of smart and patriotic Liberians, not the noise makers. Okay.
So with that being said, Dr. Ken, would you respond to that and follow? We will. Okay. So after Dr. Ken, let's Larry. Would you like to go next, and then we'll Stephen can.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great question, and I'm glad the caller did put that up there. But listen, if I was given that role, the first thing I would do, I'll be honest. I'm very honest with the Liberian people. And that means is that I'm not going to put a budget out there that is driven by flaw, right? So if I put a budget out there, it's going to be driven by the data. I'm gonna ensure that the right governance, accountability, and transparency is there, and that means providing anyone with the economic model or the budgetary framework that was used to derive those numbers. I wouldn't just go and just do a cut and paste, as Professor Kennedy said, and throw something together and just put it up there and then call it a budget. And everyone is confused about the budget, whether it's truly a budget, and the result of that. The next thing I will do is that I will enforce that the budget is driven by policy actions, right? So you don't just go and try and make budget because you want to please the House of Representatives, you want to buy more cars for the House of Representatives, or you want to give them Brian envelope. And hopefully they will sign up on the budget. Because believe it or not, I don't think with the quality of representatives and senators we have, that they do the kind of deep dive that Stephen and his team did today, to be able to look at every facet of the budget. I hold people accountable. And because normally it's always about results, it is always about actions, right? And then you have to understand at that position that this is about the people and the people money. So everything you do, you have to make sure that you're laser focused on providing or enabling the Liberian people, and that's where all the policy stuffs come in. So those are things I would do if I was part of this. I will make sure every decision is driven by the data. I will make sure that I'm honest and open and transparent to the Liberian people. Anyone can go look at the numbers. I won't just put something out there because it makes me feel good, right? It's not about making you feel good. It's about enabling the Liberian people, and it's about lifting people up. Everything we do is about lifting people up. And I mentioned poor economics at the beginning of this. If you cannot feel, if you cannot, as a leader, live on experience living on $1 or $2 a day, then you cannot provide services to your people. I don't care what position you're in, you should be able to do that. So that would be my approach. That would be my answer to that question.
Thank you. That was a good response. Professor Kennedy, I know you read a lot of the comment. Hopefully you've taken note of one that you would like to respond to. I know usually you like to look at this thing from a granular perspective, like a big overview. So we'd like to hear your comment and
Sure.
Yeah.
So Joe Monu wrote, he writes that entrepreneurship is the key to Liberia's growth, development, and prosperity. The country has 330 miles of ocean. Exactly right there. West Africa's largest virgin rainforest. The country needs entrepreneurs. He's on point. In every economy that has developed, it's the entrepreneurs that did it.
Yeah.
But the way they did it, no country, remember this, no country has developed without a strong financial sector.
Thank you.
For the financial sector, you need a way to take money from people who are saving it to the entrepreneurs who can invest it and take that chance with the money. But in order to do that, you need to have a strong regulatory framework. The central bank right now is not regulating the banks because the banks have roughly 27% non-performing loans, one of the highest. We used to be in conversation all the time. I read Madame Sirleaf's speeches. She's been complaining about the number of non-performing loans.
Yeah.
How can you have a central bank? The central bank is tasked with stabilizing the domestic economy, ensuring the unemployment rate is low, making sure you don't have high inflation, and making sure that the banks are properly regulated.
Yeah.
The banks are not being regulated. You cannot have this high number, 27% of non-performing loans. And you need a financial sector. You need financial instruments. You need to take this budget, set up a mechanism where people can be able to invest in a country to create jobs. It's nothing in this budget. This budget is all about making some people feel good. This budget is more like a legal way to rob the people.
Thank you.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Botswana is not in no IMF program. Those guys just been in existence just a few years. They're not in an IMF program. They have a stock exchange. There's a regional stock exchange in West Africa that we can participate in. But we don't have a lot of data. We don't support businesses. Everything in the economy is all extractive. You will never develop your country without those frameworks, without having regulation. So we tend to look at the U.S. because sometimes the U.S. kind of set the benchmark in terms of how to do things. Our central bank would have been around 21 years. In 2023, the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank would be around about 100 years. They made mistakes along the way.
Yes.
They learned from the Great Depression, the Great Recession. They learned from that as well because they introduced some new things, to put money into the system, something called quantitative easing, highly technical, not going to get into it, but just wanted to mention it. We need to, and Joe, you're absolutely correct. We need to create a way to take money from the people who are safe, but the people don't trust the banks.
Yeah.
There's a lack of trust in the banks. Who's going to put their money in there? Mm-hmm. I remember seeing someone from LBDI in the finance ministry discussing, trying to encourage people to buy government bonds. Mm-hmm. You look at the central bank data. I think right now on the retail side, meaning the people now, because the government is the one who is borrowing a lot from the banks, but in terms of individuals, I think they had about 145 people who are buying government bonds, government bills. They call it bonds, but it's mainly bills. Nobody wants to give their money to the government. They don't trust the government. Yeah. And because that lack of trust, it's going to be extremely hard to invest and develop the country. And then one final thing, the remittances coming from this country, when it goes to Liberia, it is quickly consumed, it's disposed of, it's not invested. There's no long-term opportunity to invest that money to do something with it. We have everything we need. It is by design that the people remains poor in Liberia. Yes. Dr. King read my research report that I did on project management, the project work done in the country. I studied that thing for over 3 years. I could have done something on finance, but I wanted to understand why Liberia remained poor. Mm-hmm. It's not all just about the ineffective government. But the development partners, they know better. When they send the work to Liberia, development work, who do they send? They send Americans there to do the work as well.
Yeah.
And then the money comes right back to America. And the work doesn't get done. 178 hospitals and clinics, and yet we have the highest infant and maternal mortality rate in the country. Why? With all the money going for healthcare, why is that happening? The development partners are not doing the work. The John Hopkins, the Tetra Tech, the ABT Associates, Family Health International, all these guys are in Liberia. International Rescue Mission. Why is the country still in the condition it's in? The development partners are not being checked. And the government itself, the legislators supposed to be sort of the check and balance. The legislator are not even checking the system. And then we have the judiciary that I'm not sure what's going on. If they can remove a sitting Supreme Court justice, it kind of tells you there's a serious issue in our country.
Exactly.
No, Larry, thank you.
Larry.
Thank you. That was a great overview, and I think you and I shared a good on the in terms of the central bank role and and using the private sector to develop the economy. We will be doing a series here on how to grow the economy to maybe to $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion. So I think we would like to have you on that too, because I think I like your perspective on the central bank, having a financial market in the economy, having a stock market, even as poor as we are, I think is essential to our economy. So thank you. That was a great overview on that. Stephen,
and how to optimize the expenditure as well.
Yes.
So thank you. And I think Larry struck a very good point when he spoke about the issue of trust. You see, I like to let me just piggyback a little bit and talk a little bit about the central bank, for example. Now, if you look across the country, you have about 7 to 12% of your banking public have actual bank accounts. About 90% of your currency is outside the bank. So your currency falls between dollar and rand. So 90% of your currency is between dollar market and rand market. That's where all of the total money is. Yeah, so dollar, it covers the stretch. So dollar, then you come all the way to rand. So it covers that whole stretch. That's where 90% of your money are. Okay. Those who have the cash for several reasons. First is Liberia is purely a cash-based economy. And two, there's no trust in the banking system. So for instance, if I took sick overnight and want to go to hospital, I will need cash at the hospital before I get treated. So for the speculated, the transaction, the speculated demand for money, I will hold my cash handy because every time I go out, I need cash to transact. Two, the history of failed banks. There are many banks in Liberia that collapse, and so people have fear. And then the second thing is people don't get their money readily when they want it from the bank.
Yeah.
So let's say if I have an account in the bank, 10,000, and I want to withdraw 8,000, at times the bank will tell you we can only give you 2,000. So all of those issues have created a limit for the bank. So they don't really have, most of the banks in Liberia they're not solidly liquid in terms of having additional money to invest. What I see in Liberia, mostly big savings club operating as commercial banks. Yes. Because, for instance, you don't even have no real investment bank in the country. Somebody that can say, you have a huge diaspora community. What it would take us for to, for instance, invest in real estate that will attract the diaspora market? So,
thank you.
Gabriel will not have to go to Liberia to spend 6 months there to build a house. I can send you my specs. You build my house. I pay a mortgage over 2 years. I can pay $2,000 a month for 2 years and have a house. I get the land. I get my house. I just move in. I don't have to go through the hassle of my relative eating my money. So you don't have those kind of investments. So now, and when you talk about entrepreneurs, it has to be driven by a number of things. For instance, cheap and affordable electricity. Yeah. It powers the economy. For people to invest in tourism, for example, you talk about 330 miles of road. You need cheap and affordable electricity, energy, or else your overall cost is going to kill you. You see most of those beaches in Liberia that are operating on generator, after a month or 2 months, their overall cost alone is killing them. And another thing I thought, and Larry spoke about this, and it's very key to development, is data. In development study, it shows the progression of the Paris Club and the Bretton Woods institution thinking over time. First, they thought that if the Millennium Development Goal will transform the world, it will take people out of poverty. And so they develop a set of goals and say if every country will achieve this goal, they will be out of poverty. What happened was that program did not take into consideration quality. It was just measuring quantity. So for instance, they wanted girls' enrollment to increase. So most countries started sending data of girl enrollment. But how many of those girls who actually solve primary math, basic arithmetic, they didn't measure that. So over time, it failed. Then they say, let's form Millennium Villages. Millennium Villages are where you go to this village and you put everything there. You put a hospital, you put a school, you put everything in the village. It's assumed that when you do that, it creates, it takes
Access
people
to
out
the
of
people.
poverty.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
but then people didn't have income. So even if you build all of those amenities in the community, people needed income. Then they say, let's put money in people's pocket by giving them loan.
Right.
What they didn't realize was when they gave these people the loan, it put them into deeper poverty, because when they took those loans, the first thing they did with the loan was to buy consumable. If I went to the bank gave me my first $500 loan. The first thing I do, I go home, I pay my children's school fee, I buy my bag of rice, I buy my gallon of oil. I'm not investing it yet. I'm using it on consumable. So then over time, I default on those loans, then my interest start adding up, then I go into deeper poverty. So nowadays, what they're doing is they say all development must be based on big data, on data. That's why when this government took over, one of the biggest mistakes it made, and this is why it's continuously showing in the budget, is they didn't do the census in 2018. That census in 2018 will have helped shape
Inform their decisions.
the decision. So your budget now will be formulated based on those real data. How many librarians have college education? How many librarians have expertise in this area? How many librarians, lawyer do we have? How many librarians, engineer we have? How many librarians, chemists? How many, if you were going to collect a huge sum of data, then you could say, you know what happened? Instead of us bringing Chinese engineer to do our role, we have
Tap into what
500
we have.
librarian engineers here already. Let's use the expertise at a reduced cost, and we'll save money on this one. Let's look at how many doctors we have. How many, all of those things will have come up through the census. So because it didn't come up, all of the assumption we're making here are just based on guesstimates,
Speculation.
as somebody said, and speculation. So that's why over time, when you don't reach your numbers, you go back to the board and do recasts. We saw over the last few years, we've been seeing people go back to the drawing board to do recasts of the budget, because if we were spending more time using data to inform our decision making and how we allot resources, we will be making more impact than just assuming. For instance, in Liberia, many persons do business without data. They just wake up in the morning and say, say they're buying slipper in Waterside today, and he goes and buy $500 slipper. He goes to Waterside, 10% buy, nobody wants slipper again. He left with huge inventory, and nobody wants slipper.
Yeah.
Stevie, are you including your closing statement?
Yeah, so I won't close because I have to.
No, we're taking calls too, right? After this, we're wrapping up.
Let me
No,
wrap
the
up.
Yeah,
on
go
this.
ahead. Right.
So it's
Let
always a
Stevie
good.
close.
It's always a good thing to be on this show, and I think it was a good conversation. I'm always available anytime you want us to have this kind of conversation about Liberia. It's something I'm passionate about. And let me also say, when Sam wanted to say, I have worked with the Ministry of Finance before in Liberia. I served as a senior economist with the Ministry of Finance. I was also one of the commissioner for customs and excise. So, I have a lot of understanding when it comes to international trade and excise. So it's good to have me. Thanks, Alex, for the invite. It's always a pleasure. Gabriel, it's good seeing you, Mr. King, and also Larry. It's a pleasure seeing you also again. Thank you so much, guys. It was a wonderful show.
Thank you
So
for
like
that.
Gabriel said, we'll be doing a futuristic thing. We'll be talking about how to improve the revenue. We'll be talking about the economy. We'll be talking about how to optimize the expenditure and things like that. So that will be a series we'll be starting. So we'll be reaching out. But today was meant to discuss the budget, even though we started getting into policies things and some comparison of regimes and things like that. We didn't intend to get into. We wanted to focus on the 2022 budget. So we're wrapping up now. So anybody who wants to give a closing statement between Larry and Joel?
Yeah, let me. I'll be pretty quick on my stuff here, because Liberia, we talk a lot, and when we give an opportunity to lead, we rarely don't lead, and there's been a lot of example of that. But listen, all of what you guys, I want to thank everybody on this call. Alex, first meeting you, and Gabriel, I want to thank you, Larry. I know, and Stephen, thanks, excellent work. I also want to thank Dennis as well, and Sonny. I was on an earlier show about a couple of weeks ago on how we transform our country. But listen, this thing is above talk. We got to come up with credible solutions on how we think we can move our country forward. This budget, we know it's a joke. We established it's a joke. It's not based on reality. But I think what needs to happen to be able to move forward with this, I think we need a change. 2023 is coming. And I think we all need to be able to engage to see whether we can have a new leadership in place in 2023 to change this system. And I would take this from Mr. Cummings. He always saying about, and I'll bring that up. I don't want to be political.
I thought we're discussing. I thought we're discussing the budget here. We're not giving.
Yeah. But I'm saying it's about.
That's his closing statement. Let him make a closing statement.
It's about changing the system. So when you change the system, is where you're going to put in the right mechanism. To be able to do the right things, to be able to have the right budget that people can trust, to Larry's point, the right budget that people can trust based on data. So I want to thank you guys for that opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King. Larry, Professor Larry.
Joe Biden says, don't tell me what you're going to do. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you're going to do. Right. The budget tells a good story in terms of what the government intends to do. It's going to be wasteful spending up and down. I don't care how you look at it. And then again, there's an ambitious plan to raise money that was never done in the past. 3 consecutive years of not growing the economy. Then all of a sudden, miraculously, you're going to grow the economy. You're going to grow your budget by 48.6% to $785.6 million. Unrealistic. We need to rethink the way the government is set up. Invest in ListGist. The Liberia Institute for Statistical and Geoanalysis, put money into data. All of the decisions you make have to be data-driven. So important. You have to do that. Data is just raw facts. You cannot dispute it. But when I get that raw facts, I can look at it and I can get information from it and make decisions based on information. That's how you operate. We don't need a Ministry of Gender. Put it under the Ministry of Health. Redesign the government to reduce your expenditures. We don't need to have a Ministry of Culture, Affairs, and Tourism. Put tourism under a board and let organize that. The Ministry of Finance Development Planning is too big for itself. Leave finance. Have development planning and economic growth with a whole bunch of development project managers in there. Redesign the government. You need your census so you can know the number of people in your population. So all the data we have right now, the numbers they're telling us, GDP per capita, it's all wrong because we haven't done the census. So this budget kind of tells us that the pro-poor thing is just a big fiasco. It hasn't worked, and it's not going to work based on what's going to happen in 2022. And the bad news is these guys are going to pass this thing. This is the group that we're depending on, a group that ratify Eton and Iboma to now step back and say, hey, we're not going to ratify this thing. It's going to pass. What can we do about it? To be honest, absolutely nothing. So I like the fact that we can come here, have a discussion, and like Dr. King said, I love the fact that Stephen has the background that he has because he can share some insights into what's really happening. But I like what Dr. King is saying. We need to kind of be forward thinking. Are we going to allow this to happen for the next 6-7 years or past 2023? One final point. This government just signed in August, they just signed a lobbying agreement to promote the administration from this year up until 2024 at $55,000 a month. It's absolutely outrageous. We're wasting money on the wrong thing. But again, look, listen, Alexander, I really appreciate what you guys are doing on this show. And Gabriel, I always watch you guys and follow you guys. I really like it. And I like the fact that Dr. King was here, Stephen was here. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Sam Jackson to bring in his 2 cents and tell us why he thinks this is the best budget of all time. And also miss not having Iva. So again, to the FOL team, Dennis, Ja, Anthony, thank you guys.
Thank you. I think we had a call on the line.
Caller, you're live. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paulina Cole, and I'm calling from Texas. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Couple questions. Well, one or two questions for Mr. Jackson. I'm not sure he's still on, but anybody else can answer. So concerning the budget, the world will as a standstill for at least a year to 2 years because of COVID. So I'm thinking that the allocation for travel, for the programs, for supply, all that variable cost, that money should have been rolled over into the 2022 budget. I didn't see any allocation for that or any line item for that. So can somebody speak to that? I was hoping Mr. Jackson was going to speak to that. Also, I understand this budget is a draft, but we all know that draft leads to final, whatever kind of report or final budget. So let's say the government is able to generate this 7 million. Can the government just operate out of surplus versus because we can generate this money, so we must be able to just spend it anyway? Can they adjust with time and make the budget more realistic and really operate out of surplus? Those are my two questions.
Thank you for that question. I think that was actually a brilliant question. I think those are two questions. This first one was the impact of COVID and the revenue being rolled over into the next budget year, which is 2023. And I think her second one was the what was
realistic.
it? What is it?
Making the budget realistic.
Making the budget more realistic, which I think some of you guys touched on a little bit here. So, would any of you guys want to take a stab at that question or statement?
Well, she's talking about the $25 the $75 has been collected, or
no, she's talking about I think the COVID fee. I think Stephen may have touched on that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that's the $75.
Okay, yes, that's it. Yeah, 75. Right.
And I thought I heard something about travel there, Gabriel.
Yeah, there's a new tax.
Yeah, that's what you was saying.
$25
And the $25 travel.
Airport tax.
Right.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, and I heard the deputy ministers on one other platform yesterday, the $75 is not included in the budget. The $75 that have been collected at the airport to and fro. So, for example, if you're coming in, you pay that $75, and you're going out, you pay that $75. That is $150 you pay. If you come in one time or going out one time, you will pay only $75. No, that is not included in the budget. Yeah, it's not included. And also, I don't know where they made the projection for the new $25 that will be that the airport user fee when you're going out. I don't know where in the budget.
It wasn't in there.
Yeah,
it's not in there.
She's saying the callers not
going. I think she was talking about unspent monies from 2021 budget that was allocated to travel and programs, etc.
So to answer that question, you need to see the fiscal outturn so that we can know, because what happened was last year the government had they did a 6-month budget. If you can recall, they did a 6-month budget so that they could catch up with the calendar year budget instead of the June to July budget. So this new budget is calendar year, January to December. So we need to see the fiscal outcome, which is the budget performance report. In that report, we will be able to see areas where how much were allocated, how much went there, how much were actually disbursed to those areas. In the absence of that, and so this is where we expect the lawmaker to ask the probing questions, so that we can see the fiscal outturn, we can see the budget performance report, and be able to look at it and see where exactly all of those, the revenue we raised, and the allotment we made, and then the disbursement, where how much went to each of those sectors. In the absence of that, we will not be able to give you offhand any real numbers. Now, on the issue of the $75, and Alex said it, the government has not has not really indicated to us in clear terms what that particular money is going. So one of the things I think, in my view, and this is just my view, is I thought because we didn't plan, they didn't budget for COVID, and it struck, and they didn't have that revenue for hiring new staff, renting facility to do the rapid test and all of the things. I thought that money was going towards cost. So since we're running this facility and we're doing this, so go now. But if you're budgeting in the new year, you have to budget for that. You can't have that particular place, generating money, operating on itself. Because if you're saying that you keep it going because you establish it when you didn't budget for it, we can understand when it was established last year, since you didn't budget. But now this new year, you have to indicate in the budget exactly how much you intend to raise from that, because it is a revenue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, even accounting for that, the $75 that's been collected when I listened to the program yesterday, even accounting for that was a struggle. The deputy minister could not speak to just the accounting, not even included in the budget, but the accounting for that amount. And so, to put it in context, what she was talking about is the carry forward money. You remember in 2020-21 budget, there was a $10 million, which was that as budget surplus. And then in the special budget, there's also something like, if I remember the figure, there was around $30 million that was cash unspent. That's what she was talking about. And I didn't see any indication in the budget how it was
infused back into it, right?
I didn't see that.
There's no way Liberia should run a surplus budget.
we are the problems we have, right?
That was a good question. Gabriel, I think we got to close now.
Yeah, I think we heard a closing statement from Dr. King. I think Larry may have given his. Stephen, do you have any?
No, I closed already. I think it's a good show, and thanks for having me, and thanks to Dennis for hosting us. So thank you, guys.
Yeah. So with that, Alex, do you have anything though to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to thank Dr. Joel for coming on, Larry for coming on. Excuse me, Joel, if I just call you Joel, me I'll let that to business.
No problem, my man.
So Larry for coming on, and Steve for coming on at the last minute. It was a great show. What we wanted to do, we wanted to educate the people on the budget, and I think we did that a lot. We kind of delved into the revenue, and we kind of have a little understanding of where some of these increases may be coming from, and we sort of understand some of the pitfall of these estimates. We can only hold our breath that they're done. We also understand that most of these increases are going into recurring expenditure, and especially they're going into expenditure of the legislatures, especially the executive and the judiciary. And not much is going into the PSIP, the Private Sector Investment Program, which is not really development. And it's something like, if you're looking at in the detailed budget, it has things like county tour, it has the bicentennial program, it has executive mansion renovation, which is it's an old age thing from Stephen Enter. Let me pick on you a little bit.
And we got 8.4 million for agriculture.
Yeah, and thanks, gentlemen. We would love to have you back on the program. And thanks to our listener, our viewers, and thanks to those who commented, and thanks to the lady who made the phone call. Thanks to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next Saturday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home.